I knew something was off the moment I saw the envelope. It wasn't the usual junk mail or pizza coupons that cluttered my front gate. No, this one had intent. Crisp white, glossy, with a gold embossed seal that looked like it belonged on a wine label or a divorce decree. Stamped in bold letters, "Final notice, compliance required." I pulled it from the mailbox and felt that small thud in my chest, the kind of thud that tells you something's about to get taken from you. I read the first line before I even made it to the front steps. Your property has been determined to fall outside the approved architectural standards of Maple Hollow Preserve. Pursuant to Municipal Code 14-07B, your structure and surrounding grounds are scheduled for mandatory clearing within 48 hours. Failure to vacate may result in administrative demolition. I stood there, on the stone walkway my grandfather had laid by hand in 1963, holding a letter telling me the house behind me, the one he built with his own two hands and a wheelbarrow full of river rock, was about to be erased because it didn't match the neighborhood. I didn't laugh, not at first. It took me a few seconds to get past the gut punch of bureaucratic insanity before the absurdity really hit me. Administrative demolition? I'm a real estate lawyer. That's like telling a surgeon their birth certificate's expired. And it was signed, of course, in blue ink and looping cursive by Karen Aldridge, president of the Maple Hollow Preserve Homeowners Association. Of course it was. I took a slow breath, walked up the porch stairs, and reached out to steady myself against the column my grandfather carved from Tennessee limestone. It was still solid as the day he set it. The grain ran deep. You could see where his chisel had danced, where he'd left little imperfections that somehow made the whole thing perfect. This house wasn't just a house. My grandfather, Jeremiah Booker, was a mason. Not in the fraternal robes and handshakes sense, but in the real sense. Stone, brick, fireplaces, foundations, the kind of man who built things that outlived him. He laid the first block of this house in August of 1963. No contractors, no blueprints. Just a truckload of quarried rock, a pickaxe, and that quiet stubbornness that ran in his blood like calcium. This street used to be working class. A patchwork of families, barbecues, and lawn chairs in the driveway. Puerto Rican flags waving next to Black Jesus murals and the smell of fried catfish drifting from open windows. That was the world I grew up in. After my dad passed, I was 10, it was my granddad who raised me. He taught me how to swing a hammer and speak like I knew something worth saying. Taught me how to hold my ground without raising my voice. I think that's why I became a lawyer. In court, as in life, you win by standing still when everyone else tries to move you. When I inherited the house, I didn't change a damn thing. Still had the brass flag holder on the front porch, still had the stone arch he carved over the entrance, one piece of unbroken limestone shaped by hand with the year etched in the base, 1963. That arch is a miracle of balance and sweat. It's the heart of the house. You walk under it and you feel history holding you up. And now Karen Aldridge wants it gone, because it's not white stucco with a 3-car garage and an HOA-approved mailbox from the Uniformity Collection. They say it disrupts visual harmony. Number. What it does is remind them that something existed here before the Teslas and trimmed boxwoods. And that scares people like Karen. You see, Maple Hollow wasn't always a gated fantasy of solar panels and beige siding. Before the development came in, this land was a mosaic of old homes, unpaved alleys, and unshakable people. Slowly, they bought them out. Every single one. Except mine. And now, with their tidy little empire almost complete, they've decided I'm not just a holdout. I'm a problem they're ready to solve. Only thing is, they just stepped on the wrong piece of stone, and it's not moving. The first shot was small. Petty even. So small I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday morning, late spring. I remember because the honeysuckle was blooming by the gate and I'd just come back from court, a zoning dispute up in Edison where a developer tried to sneak through a variance on wetlands. Spoiler, he didn't. I pulled into the driveway and noticed something was off, something subtle, my mailbox. It wasn't the black iron one I'd had since college, the one I'd mounted on a salvaged post from a job site my grandfather once worked on, with our family name etched in brass. That one was gone. In its place was a new, shiny, regulation-sized, eggshell white box with a reflective MH152 printed on the side. HOA issue, not a dent on it, no warning, no note, just there. I stared at it for a moment like it might explain itself. Then I knocked on my neighbor's door. Steve, nice guy, mid-30s, financial planner, always mowing his lawn like he's prepping for a PGA Tour stop, looked confused when I asked. "Oh yeah," he said, shifting awkwardly in his doorway. "I think the HOA replaced a bunch of mailboxes this week, standardization thing. Didn't they email you?" "No." Well, they posted it on the neighborhood app. You're not on Maple Talk? I just blinked at him. Right, he said quickly. Sorry, they said the old boxes weren't compliant with the aesthetic design code. Karen was really pushing for uniformity. You know how she gets. I knew. I also knew I'd never signed anything allowing them to touch a single inch of my property. The next day I got a letter, certified of course, from the HOA's Architectural Compliance Committee. Your existing facade presents elements that deviate from the approved architectural color palette and material guidelines. Specifically, stone exterior, non-uniform, non-approved tone. Flag holder, non-standard fixture. Mailbox, now corrected, see note. You are hereby given 14 days to submit a remediation plan or face a fine of $200 per day. I remember actually laughing at that line, now corrected, see note, as if they'd done me a favor, like replacing my grandfather's iron mailbox with a plastic clone from a suburban dystopia was some kind of public service. They even included a glossy pamphlet with acceptable facade tones, all 12 shades of beige, and a helpful link to a mailbox vendor offering HOA-compliant models at a discounted rate. The mail came in a manila folder with Karen's signature printed at the bottom in that same loopy cursive I'd come to recognize, where the letters smiled but the words didn't. I drafted a letter in response, respectfully declining their remediation timeline and reminding them of the minor detail that my property predated their charter by half a century. They never wrote back. Instead, I got another violation 2 weeks later, this time for my chimney. Specifically for having a non-certified external chimney structure inconsistent with Maple Hollow's approved roofing silhouette. Let me break that down for you. They didn't like the way my grandfather's stone chimney looked against the skyline. That chimney was built by hand, not just laid but carved. It wasn't non-certified, it was overbuilt by a man who considered gravity a polite suggestion, and now it was a violation, along with apparently my entire facade. The final note of that letter stuck with me. Your property lies within the newly incorporated Maple Hollow Preserve boundaries and is subject to community development standards as part of the long-term revitalization plan. I read that line 3 times. Revitalization. It's a funny word, sounds like healing, but in developer speak it usually means scrape the history off the land and replace it with condos that all look like a dentist office. I set the letter down, poured myself a coffee, and sat under the stone arch. The air smelled like spring, cut grass, warm brick. Somewhere nearby, a mockingbird was singing. I looked around the porch, the carved columns, the cracked clay pot with the mint my granddad used to chew, the tiny chisel marks on the railing. Then I looked back at the letter. They weren't just trying to repaint my house. They were trying to erase it. Things didn't go quiet after that. I figured as a lawyer, a formal rebuttal and a solid boundary line would buy me some breathing room. I even added a few citations for flavor. A little reminder that I knew the rules better than they did. Karen didn't take the hint. About a month later, I noticed someone walking slowly along the edge of my property. Clipboard, polished loafers, polo shirt tucked so tight into khakis I could count his belt loops. Not a neighbor I recognized. I stepped outside. You lost? He gave a start like I'd caught him mid-burglary. No, just conducting a routine HOA perimeter assessment. You must be Mr. Booker? I must be. He smiled like he practiced it in a mirror. Great. Well, per Maple Hollow's Phase 3 expansion plan, we're evaluating fencing consistency and zone allocations. Zone allocations? Yes, sir, he said, tapping a laminated site map. We've got your parcel noted as B3 transitional. That includes drainage right-of-way, sidewalk reorientation, and possible auxiliary amenity access in future development cycles. That's a lot of words for you're trying to build a dog park through my backyard. He cleared his throat. All I'm saying is, there's opportunity here, especially if you're open to a buyout. Premium pricing, of course. I didn't answer, I just looked down. That's when I saw it, a line of white chalk running from the far corner of my lot all the way across the back fence. Clean, straight, fresh. They'd literally marked my land like it was already theirs. The next morning, 2 people in HOA polos were photographing my house from the sidewalk. They didn't bother hiding it. One even knelt to take a close-up of the foundation stone that had my grandfather's initials carved into it. When I opened the front door, they scattered like squirrels. Later that week, I saw one of my newer neighbors, guy named Chase, mid-20s, always smells like axe and entitlement, staring at my house like it was a cracked phone screen. Everything all right? I asked, stepping out to get the mail. He hesitated, then smirked like we were old friends. Honestly, Mr. Booker, just thinking out loud here, but if you ever decide to sell, I've got clients who'd pay serious money. You could walk away with double market. I'm not looking to walk away. Sure, he said. Just saying. You know, this house has character, but it's kind of holding back the curb appeal for the rest of the street. HOA is trying to create cohesion. People want consistency now. Clean lines, neutral tones, that sort of thing. You could get in on the ground floor of something big. Son, I said, this house is the ground floor. He chuckled like he didn't get it, which he didn't, and strutted off down the walk. I watched him go, and for the first time, I felt it, that slow heat behind my ribs. Not rage, not yet, but a tightening in my chest like the first note of a long, low song you didn't want to hear. Then came the breaking point. It was a Friday evening. I'd just gotten back from court, tax dispute over a lakeside easement, and there it was. Taped to my door in official HOA letterhead, double stamped. Notice of violation and immediate abatement order. Pursuant to Municipal Statute 14-07B, your dwelling has been deemed out of compliance with Maple Hollow's architectural and community investment standards. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. Failure to comply will result in administrative demolition. Administrative. Demolition. 2 words that don't belong anywhere near a family home. It wasn't a threat. It was a sentence. Signed, as always, with that same elegant, passive-aggressive flourish. Karen Aldridge, President, Maple Hollow. Preserve HOA, like she was ordering a new shipment of gardenias instead of declaring war. I stood there, rereading the letter as the sun set over the last original house in the neighborhood. The porch light clicked on. Beneath my feet, the stones were cool, solid, my grandfather's work. I folded the letter once, clean and crisp, and slid it into my inside jacket pocket. They'd drawn their chalk lines. They'd taken their photos, made their offers, played their little games. Now they wanted to bulldoze my past like it never mattered. But I'm a booker, and we don't back down over threats. We build foundations under them. I didn't go straight to war. That's not how I was raised, and it's definitely not how I practice law. You don't win battles by yelling. You win by documenting, by building your case piece by piece until it's too heavy for the other side to lift. So the Monday after the "we're going to demolish your house" memo, I did what any good citizen would do. I went to City Hall. The clerk at the zoning counter was polite in the way people are when they're sure nothing you say is going to change anything. Her name tag said Tiffany, and she had long pink nails that clicked like a metronome against her keyboard. "Hi there," she chirped. "How can I help you today?" "I'm here about an abatement order issued against my home on Willow Street. I'd like to file a formal challenge." She frowned slightly, typed something in, then tilted her screen toward me. Yes, 117 Willow. That's the Maple Hollow redevelopment zone, right?" "It's my grandfather's home, built in 1963. "Right," she said, smiling like that was a fun trivia fact. "But it's in the designated improvement district now. That area was annexed into Maple Hollow's overlay last year." I never received notice of any annexation. "Oh," she said, looking suddenly very interested in her fingernails. "It was posted in the weekly Lakeside Ledger. That satisfies the municipal notice requirement." "The Ledger?" I raised an eyebrow. 12 people read that, and 9 of them are over 80. She gave a shrug like gravity was someone else's problem. "Legally, that's all that's required. If you have concerns, you can take it up with the HOA. They're the managing authority now." "City signed that power over to a homeowners association?" Tiffany's smile didn't even flicker. "It's a public-private partnership." Of course it was. Back home, I drafted an official request to meet with the HOA board. Attached every statute I could find, outlining non-retroactive applicability of private design standards to pre-existing properties. The response came in the form of a PDF attachment, emailed at 7:02 a.m. the next day. "Mr. Booker, we appreciate your inquiry. Unfortunately, Maple Hollow Preserve's leadership is unavailable for individual consultation at this time. Per Article 6, Section 2 of the Community Standards Charter, you may submit approved reconstruction plans to bring your property into compliance within 15 calendar days, or initiate voluntary relocation. Best regards, HOA Compliance Department. 15 days to redesign and rebuild a stone house by hand." Right. I tried calling the HOA's listed number, left 3 messages, no response, so I did what people like Karen hate more than noise. I showed up calm, dressed in a navy blazer and courtroom shoes, and requested time to speak at their monthly community meeting. Karen met me outside the clubhouse. She was wearing pearls and the kind of beige that thinks it's better than other beiges. "Mr. Booker," she said, voice warm enough to toast bread, I do hope this isn't about that compliance notice. I assure you, no one wants conflict." "Then maybe don't schedule a demolition of my home for Wednesday." She smiled, the kind of smile with teeth behind it. "We're simply following municipal procedure. Our goal is to create a community that reflects shared values and long-term vision. Your property, well, it's a bit of an outlier. It's been here longer than your HOA." "That may be," she said, in that tone people use to dismiss history as an inconvenience. "But we have to consider the neighborhood's aesthetic coherence. Our investors are quite sensitive to visual continuity. Your house creates friction." "Friction," I echoed. "You have to understand, we're not trying to be punitive. We're trying to raise the value of everyone's homes, including yours." I looked her square in the eye. "So raise it by bulldozing it?" Karen blinked once, not surprised, not angry, just recalculating. "Mr. Booker," she said, sweet as a syrup spill, "perhaps a compromise. Richard and I would be happy to make an offer, a generous one. You'd walk away clean, no fines, no record, just cash and a fresh start." There it was. The offer, wrapped in civility, lacquered in smiles, but under it, the same old pressure. Sell or be swallowed. I exhaled slowly and said, "Thanks, but no thanks. Some of us don't measure history in square footage." Her eyes twitched at that, just slightly before the smile returned. "Well," she said, adjusting her pearls, "I suppose we'll just let the process play out." "You do that," I said, "but don't confuse silence with surrender." That night, I sat under the porch light with the abatement order in one hand and my grandfather's old level in the other, the same one he used to check every stone. And that's when it hit me. Something wasn't right, not just legally, physically. Because in all the HOA maps, in their site plans and pamphlets, they kept referring to my property as B3 transitional. I'd never heard that term in zoning law, and it was time to find out why. The gloves were still on Dabaniki Sen, but I was about to head to the one place where smiles don't matter. The records office. The records office smelled like dust and old toner. I'd been in 100 just like it, dim lighting, metal file cabinets groaning with dead paper, and that familiar hum of air conditioning that always ran 2 degrees too cold. A clerk named Dennis sat behind the desk, mid-50s, wore reading glasses on a string and a coffee stain on his shirt that looked permanent. My kind of guy. "Ellis Booker," I said, sliding my ID across. "I'm requesting the original parcel records, utility easements, and drainage schematics for 117 Willow Street and the surrounding Maple Hollow overlay." Dennis squinted at the ID, then raised one eyebrow. "Maple Hollow? You pissed someone off, huh?" I smiled. Something like that. He disappeared into the back and 20 minutes later came out with 2 thick folders and a cardboard tube of architectural drawings so old it crackled when he set it down. "These go back to the 1950s, he said. "Some of it's handwritten. You want copies?" "I want answers." I took a seat and started reading. The more I turned the pages, the more my stomach dropped. There it was, in black ink and municipal shorthand on the original engineering layout for the area, a drainage pipeline marked as City Storm, Drainage, Primary Flow, 1962. Install. And its path ran directly under my backyard. It got worse. The easement, the legal right for anyone to use that land for access or maintenance, it was never completed. There was a permit request stamped pending in 1963, and then nothing. No approval, no deeded right, no payment, no recorded agreement. That meant the pipe had been laid on my grandfather's property without a formal easement, and ever since, the city, and later Maple Hollow's HOA, had quietly maintained and used it for water runoff. Every time it rained, their fancy streets, their sidewalks, their perfectly sloped driveways, they all drained through that pipe under my land. They built their eco-conscious community on a stolen conduit. That wasn't just a paperwork oversight. That was an environmental liability waiting to explode. I pulled out my phone and started snapping photos, zoomed in on the legal inconsistencies, the maps, the signatures that weren't there. The whole thing was one gust of wind away from falling apart. But there was one more piece. At the very bottom of the second folder was a stamped report, filed just last year, by Green Ridge Environmental Consulting, the same firm Maple Hollow used to flaunt their Sustainable Community Award. In the fine print, buried beneath the graphs and buzzwords, was a sentence that changed the entire game. Note: all primary stormwater exit points rest on continuous access easement parcels verified under 1963 drainage agreement or subsequent updates. Except they weren't. Because mine never had one. That meant Maple Hollow's entire eco-certification, the one they used to secure zoning approvals, investment grants, and their self-righteous HOA charter, was based on a lie. And if I revoked access, they'd be in direct violation of federal EPA code. No drainage access, no stormwater management, no certification, no HOA. I leaned back in the plastic chair, folder open on my lap, heart pounding. They'd tried to erase me because I didn't match their siding and shrubbery, but underneath it all, literally, they'd been trespassing on my family's land for 60 years. The system they built was balancing on a pipe they didn't own, and if that pipe got shut down, they wouldn't just lose their aesthetics, they'd lose everything. That night, I made 3 calls. The first was to the Environmental Protection Agency to file a formal inquiry about unpermitted stormwater flow through private land. The second was to a local reporter named Nadia Velasquez. Sharp, relentless, and best of all, loved a good David versus Goliath story. I sent her the documents, the photos, and a note. Maple Hollow HOA, illegally draining stormwater through black family's legacy home. No easement, no right, just entitled infrastructure. The third call? That one was to my printer. I had some certified letters to mail. I don't make moves in anger, I make them in sequence. You don't unbuild a house by kicking the door, you start with the foundation. And now, I had mine. 60 years of silent trespass, federally regulated infrastructure running like a vein beneath my land, and not a single legal stitch holding it together. That meant leverage. The kind of leverage you don't yell about. The kind you set down quietly in front of people and let them panic. I spent the next 2 days crafting the kind of paper trail that turns whispers into subpoenas. Step 1. Cease and desist. I drafted a formal letter to the HOA and Maple Hollow Development Corporation, addressed jointly to Karen Aldridge and her husband, Richard, because of course she married a developer. It stated in polite but unmistakable terms that all use of the subsurface stormwater pipeline beneath my property must immediately cease due to lack of legal easement or compensation. Any further use would constitute unlawful trespass and violation of federal clean water infrastructure laws under Title 33. Step 2. EPA TIP Submission. I uploaded everything: historical maps, site plans, the 1963 permit void, the Greenridge Report, to the EPA's Region 4 Enforcement Division, flagged it under stormwater discharge on unpermitted private land. It may take time, I figured, but once they got hold of this, there'd be auditors in polos knocking on Karen's door faster than HOA could say violation. Step 3. Trespass suit preparation. I pulled out the letterhead from my private law practice and began the initial draft of a civil complaint. It was mostly a scarecrow, designed to be seen, not necessarily filed, but it included calculated back pay that's high for 30+ years of unpermitted utility access, adjusted for inflation, estimated damages for structural risk to my foundation caused by poor drainage grading, a motion to issue an emergency injunction blocking further construction or alterations on any property benefiting from the illegal drainage line. Step 4. Go public. Nadia Velasquez, God bless her, didn't even wait for a second coffee before biting. She called me the morning after I sent her the files. Her voice crackled through the phone, excited like she'd found gold under her welcome mat. Ellis, this is explosive. You're telling me this HOA's entire stormwater system runs through your yard and they never got legal permission? That's what the documents say. She paused. Do they know you know? Not yet. I could hear her grin through the receiver. They're about to. She didn't wait for permission. By noon, the next day, her column was up online. The Pipe Under Maple Hollow, How One Man's Stone House Could Collapse an HOA Empire. Ellis Booker, a real estate attorney and longtime resident of what is now Maple Hollow Preserve, has uncovered evidence that his historic family property has been used illegally for HOA stormwater drainage for decades, without easement, compensation, or consent. The article had it all. Old maps, quotes from me, a photo of my grandfather's hand-carved arch, and just enough shade to make Karen squirm. I didn't hear from the HOA that day, but I did hear from 3 neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. One of them whispered over the phone, "Karen's melting down. She called an emergency board meeting. I think they're scared of what else you've got." I wasn't done. I gathered all the documents, in color, labeled, tabbed, and placed them in a black leather folio. Tucked inside, I added a single page addressed to Karen, typed in clean 12-point font. Ms. Aldridge, in light of your recent demolition notice and continued actions taken against my property without due process, I submit the following. Your HOA's infrastructure is in violation of state and federal law. Your eco-certification is based on false claims. I am willing to resolve this dispute without litigation, under very specific terms. I recommend you read the attached before your next board meeting. Sincerely, Ellis Booker, Esquire. And then, I waited. Sometimes the best way to rattle a cage is to let the bird wonder what you're not saying. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening, 6 p.m. sharp, at the Maple Hollow Clubhouse. That building, with its polished stone facade, yoga studio, and fresh eucalyptus-scented bathrooms, sat right on top of what used to be a community garden. The irony wasn't lost on me. I showed up 5 minutes early, wearing the same charcoal suit I wore in court when I needed a jury to lean in. Not flashy, not loud, just intentional. Under my arm was the black leather folio with the kind of paperwork that made institutions sweat. As I stepped into the clubhouse lobby, the conversation died like someone hit mute on a dinner party. All the board members were seated in their usual semicircle, Karen front and center, back straight like a steel rod in designer linen, Richard beside her scanning the crowd with those developers' eyes, already calculating square footage and damage control. A few community members were there too, mostly the ones who played along to get along. Pastel polos, pressed khakis, people who'd never known a home that hadn't passed through escrow in the last 10 years. Karen looked up and gave me that trademark HOA smile, polite, clipped, weaponized. "Mr. Booker," she said, voice echoing slightly in the acoustics of Too Much Marble. "This meeting is for HOA members in good standing. I don't believe you." "I brought handouts," I said, stepping forward. There's something about a man holding a folder full of legal documents that short-circuits the usual HOA power dynamic. Even Richard sat up straighter. I passed out the documents, one per board member, one for the official meeting record. Then I opened my own copy and began to read. "I'm here tonight not to protest," I said. "I'm here to inform." Karen opened her mouth, probably to object, but I beat her to it. "According to these records, certified by the county, confirmed by environmental consultants, and submitted to the EPA, the HOA's primary stormwater drainage system passes beneath my property." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. There is no legal easement, no maintenance agreement, no compensation, just 60 years of assumed access. I flipped the page. According to Greenridge Environmental's own certification report, which you submitted to secure your sustainability zoning variance, all discharge points must rest on parcels with continuous easement rights. I let that hang for a beat. Karen's smile started to crack. "Meaning," I continued, "that if I revoke access, and I already have, by the way, effective 9 a.m. this morning, your entire runoff system is in violation of federal water management law." Richard leaned forward. "Surely there's a way to—" "Oh, there is," I said, "but let me finish." I slid the next document out and laid it face up on the table. "This is a draft complaint for unlawful trespass, back compensation, and environmental damages. It also includes a petition for an emergency injunction to freeze any construction or demolition activity tied to the affected system." Someone in the back gasped. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "This is blackmail," she hissed. "This is civil procedure," I replied calmly. I stepped toward the projector, slid in a USB, and brought up a color-coded map of the neighborhood. "Everything shaded in red," I said, "benefits from illegal access to my land. That includes most of Willow, 2/3 of Cottonwood, and every amenity south of Elm." More murmurs. "And as of today, I've submitted a formal complaint to the EPA and copied the county zoning board. I've also forwarded the full file to the Lakeside Chronicle, courtesy of Nadia Velasquez. I imagine they'll be publishing something tomorrow morning. Front page, probably." Richard turned ashen. Karen blinked twice. A man in a blue golf shirt, one of the newer board members, leaned forward and said, What do you want?" I let the silence stretch just long enough. "Here's my proposal," I said evenly. 1. Rescind the abatement order, immediately. 2. Acknowledge in writing that my property is exempt from all Maple Hollow aesthetic requirements due to its pre-existing status. 3. Enter into a formal access agreement for the drainage system, with back pay waived in exchange for permanent legal recognition of historical status. Karen opened her mouth again, still not learning, but this time it was Richard who stopped her. He laid a hand gently on her arm. "We'll consider it," he said. "Let's discuss it in executive session." "You'll have until noon tomorrow," I said. "After that, the injunction gets filed, and I let the EPA do what they do." The meeting ended without applause, but it didn't need one. I walked out into the night air, calm and slow. Outside, waiting near the curb, was Nadia. She grinned and handed me a single printed copy of tomorrow's paper. The Pipe and the Precedent, How One Man's Fight May Drown an HOA in Its Own Runoff. I chuckled. Bit dramatic. She raised an eyebrow. "That's the brand." I nodded, watching the clubhouse lights flicker behind tinted glass. Good, I said. They could use a little exposure. I don't usually read the newspaper before coffee, but that morning I made an exception. Right there on the front page of the Lakeside Chronicle, just beneath a headline about the city's 4th of July parade, was a full-color photo of my house. The stone arch, the flag bracket, the irises along the walkway, and the headline, "Storm Beneath the Suburbs, Historic Homeowner. Exposes HOA's underground violations." It was a good piece, balanced, firm. Nadia had done her homework. She walked readers through the drainage system scandal, the missing easement, the false eco-certification, and the HOA's aggressive tactics, all wrapped in a story about legacy, community, and how the last original house in Maple Hollow was nearly bulldozed to preserve visual harmony. By 9:30 a.m., my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, emails, messages from neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in years, or ever, now suddenly remembering we were all part of the same community. By 10 o'clock, local news vans had rolled into the cul-de-sac like a parade of reckoning. Channel 4, Channel 8, even the college radio station sent a sophomore in a beanie and holding a microphone like it might bite. I didn't give a speech. I didn't need to. The paperwork spoke for itself. I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, as the HOA board held an emergency press conference on the clubhouse steps. Karen stood flanked by Richard and 2 visibly uncomfortable board members. Her blazer was crisp, her smile brittle. "We were unaware of the incomplete documentation regarding the easement," she said. "We take environmental compliance very seriously and are currently working with Mr. Booker to resolve the matter." "Is it true," someone shouted, "that the HOA issued a demolition order on a historically significant home?" Karen blinked. "We issued a standard abatement notice consistent with our community standards." A reporter held up a copy of the letter I'd released, the one with administrative demolition in bold type. "So, not exactly standard then?" Karen's voice faltered. Richard stepped forward, his tone smoother than silk. "We are in the process of reevaluating certain enforcement procedures to ensure alignment with both legal standards and community values. Translation: we got caught and we're trying to look busy while the house burns down." Meanwhile, I forwarded my EPA complaint tracking number to every local journalist who asked. One news anchor nearly choked reading it live on air. Maple Hollow HOA may face civil penalties of up to $250,000 for unpermitted environmental discharge, according to federal clean water statutes. But the real moment? That came during the town hall meeting the city scheduled after the story broke. They had to move it to the high school auditorium because so many people showed up. Neighbors, residents, developers, a few politicians who suddenly remembered they represented this district. Karen arrived late, walked in like she hadn't spent the last 6 months trying to erase me off the map. When they opened the floor, I didn't stand right away. I waited until the second wave of shouting had passed. People angry about fines, sprinkler systems, lawn paint, parking passes, all the little HOA indignities that finally found an outlet. Then I walked to the mic, folio under my arm. "I'm Ellis Booker," I said. "Real estate attorney, homeowner, grandson of Jeremiah Booker, who built my home with his hands in 1963, back when this neighborhood was a patchwork of grit and promise, not a showroom." You could hear a pin drop. For years I've paid taxes, cut my lawn, fixed my fence, didn't ask for trouble, but it came knocking anyway, wrapped in rules, fines, and a demolition order signed by someone who's never laid a brick in her life. Karen's face was locked in a practiced expression of polite restraint. I held up the map. "This is what they built under my home. This line right here. Stormwater from half your streets, flowing through a pipe they never asked permission to use. 60 years of silent trespass. And they came after me for being out of alignment with their aesthetic vision." A few gasps, a few murmurs. Someone actually said, "Damn." I let that sit before I added, "And here's the real kicker. If I hadn't pulled the documents, if I'd just moved or folded or let it go, this would still be happening. You'd still be getting fined for mailbox colors and porch lights while they lied on federal paperwork to keep their green certification and rake in zoning perks." There was a pause, then someone started clapping. It was slow, unsure, then others joined in, until half the auditorium was on its feet. The next day, 3 things happened in quick succession. Karen Aldridge announced her voluntary resignation due to personal health reasons. The HOA issued a formal statement rescinding the demolition order in light of new information. The City Council introduced a resolution to review and restrict the authority of HOAs on pre-existing structures. By Friday, the clubhouse doors were locked, pending an internal audit. By Monday, the EPA emailed me to say my complaint had been escalated to enforcement review. And by Tuesday, The HOA's attorney reached out to request a non-confrontational sit-down to resolve matters amicably. I told them I'd think about it. After all, I had a porch to sit on, and the rain was coming. It rained the following week, not a dramatic movie-style storm, just a slow, steady, quiet kind of rain that sinks into the soil and reminds the world it's still spinning. I sat out on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the drops gather on the stone railing. They slid along the chisel marks like they'd always belonged there, tracing grooves carved 60 years ago by a man with rough hands and soft eyes. The same porch they'd tried to erase. The demolition order was gone, officially rescinded and replaced with a letter from the new interim president of the HOA, a retired librarian named Marcia Lee who actually waved at me when we passed each other on the street. Imagine that. They agreed to every point, full exemption from aesthetic regulations, formal access easement for the storm drain, and recognition of my property as a historically significant site. No fine, no further violations, just peace and a check. Technically, it was called a Stormwater Infrastructure Maintenance Agreement, but let's call it what it was, back pay with a side of humility. I used part of it to repoint the chimney. Not that it needed it, I just figured Granddad would have liked that. The rest? Well, I started talking to a local nonprofit about turning my house into a living landmark, a small place where kids could come learn about craftsmanship, neighborhood history, and how not everything old needs to be painted beige to be valuable. Karen Aldridge hasn't been seen much since she stepped down. Word is she and Richard are quietly shopping for a house in a less complicated community. Good. Maple Hollow stayed quiet after that. The clubhouse reopened, a few new faces on the board, a little less bark in their newsletters. They even dropped the fines for non-standard mailbox designs. I got a thank you card from a neighbor I'd never met. Said she'd finally been able to repaint her door the shade of blue her grandmother loved, without getting cited. Small victories. One evening near sunset, I stood at the edge of my property line, right where that old chalk mark had once dared to slice my history in half. Now there's a new mark, a bronze plaque set into the earth with a simple inscription. Booker House, hand-built, hand-saved. Sometimes I catch people reading it as they walk by. Most just nod or smile politely, but some stop. They touch the stone, ask questions, listen, and I tell them about a man who laid every brick himself, about a grandson who became a lawyer because he learned early that the world doesn't always respect what it doesn't understand, and about a pipe no one thought to check until someone did. Then I go back to my chair, pour another cup of coffee, and let the quiet settle in around me. They tried to erase my story. Instead, they helped me write a new chapter, on my land, on my terms, and it's not going anywhere.